Welcome to the Week 5 lecture, The Life of the Journal. We're going to be talking a lot about journals' history and also the mechanisms of peer review and manuscript creation. And this lecture was developed by Barbara Meyers Ford. She is a teacher within the GW program, and she is um, heading up the journals track. So if you like what you hear in these lectures and you want to pursue a career or a path in journals, then I would recommend that you see Barbara and take Barbara's class. She founded the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and she worked for many years at the American Chemical Society, and there's not anybody that I know that knows more about journal publishing than Barbara Meyers Ford. So let's get started. The history of journals also tracks back to the history of books. Scientists working in any discipline were not called such until 1834. Before then, the ancient Greeks and Romans, we have a history of man attempting to create structure and understand behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experimentation, although those words all were not applied until much later. These natural scientists, primarily men of the privileged classes, would share their observations and thoughts with one another through correspondence. Thus, the development of their communications came first in the form of the learned society, where such individuals could converse in person, and their letters became the foundation for their shared recordings of their activities concerning the world and its place in the universe. This slide highlights the most significant milestones between those initial communications and the appearance of the first scholarly journals. First society equals Compagnie du Gai Savoir, the oldest academy in Europe, now called Académie des Jeux Floraux, and that equals the Academy of Floral Games. Renaissance begins a new age of intellectual curiosity. Also, Gutenberg invents the printing press, which fed the Age of Enlightenment with the publication of the first printed and bound books. So you're beginning to see some developments that will lead to the publishing of journals. And those letters, those correspondence, that's why when you see in a lot of descriptions and aims of scopes for journals the word letters, this tracks back to the very beginning of scientific discovery and the discourse that these natural scientists were having. So journals really tracks back to the beginning of books and also to that thirst and hunger for knowledge. Although the French have the bragging rights for the very first journal, the English have the prize for longevity, as the Philosophical Transactions have been continuously published since Volume 1, Issue 1 in 1665. It was 100 years after the first learned scholarly society and the first printed books that journals came into existence. These journals initially were a compilation of the letters, which served to connect men of science. One way to take in this lecture is to sort of sit back and listen and read the slides and kind of digest all of the information. There's a lot here. This foundational lecture has been done over the last 3 years and we've continually refined it, but there's still a lot of information to absorb. Point of interest with regard to the Copyright Act of 1709. The World Copyright Union was founded in Geneva nearly 250 years after the first Copyright Act was enacted. Sometimes the law follows society, and other times society must catch up to legislation. With the American Philosophical Society on the scene, the U.S. begins to catch up to its European and other international counterparts in establishing a means for more formal communication among our practitioners and inventors, just as the Industrial Revolution arrived. This and subsequent slides demonstrate how the pace of innovation in publishing moved from a frequency of centuries to decades as significant advances in law, technology, and knowledge preservation, aka libraries. The world's first library in Assyria, this library known as the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, named after Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, is a collection of thousands of clay tablets and fragments containing texts of all kinds, circa 700 BC, predating the Great Library of Alexandria, a public library open to those with the proper scholarly and literary qualifications, which was founded at about 300 BC. The Bibliothèque de Paris, the Library of Paris, combined with the National Library of France, is the oldest continually running public library service, dating back to 1368, when it was housed at the Louvre. It has moved several times over the past 700 years into newer and larger accommodations. The small U.S. Congressional Library was housed in the United States Capitol for most of the 19th century until the early 1890s. Most of the original collection had been destroyed by the British in 1814 during the War of 1812. To restore the collection in 1815, former President Thomas Jefferson sold Congress 6,487 books, his entire personal collection. While partly altruistic, the sale allowed Jefferson to pay debts incurred since leaving the presidency. Well, there are a couple of digressions here in this lecture, and when you take Barbara's classes, you will just sort of be immersed in these digressions. She has really a wealth of knowledge to share. And again, here are a few things. The one thing to note is that America was a little slow to really embrace journal publishing, and that's because we were getting our country together. So once we did that, we then were able to get up to speed and start launching our own journals. Continuing with the key innovations that made marks on the intellectual and production aspects of journals, we see this pace speeding up as the middle of the 19th century neared. Critical innovations impacting the production quality of journals were Nicephore Nicepe, the invention of photography, and Philip Watt's sewing machine, which introduced a new form of binding for printers and publishers. I'll apologize for my French. I'm not very adept at speaking it. The National Library of Medicine, originally called the Library of the Army Surgeon General, began the era of concentrated investment in preserving knowledge gained through medical practice and research. Researchers and scholars came to use each other's innovations to alert each other of important discoveries. Samuel Morse's telegraph, later hailed as the Victorian Internet. I recommend to you the book with that title by Tom Standish, published in 1998. So a lot of these, again, when you're thinking of rapid communications or letters or correspondence, these kinds of things helped all of that, helped and allowed people to interact and communicate. And medical discovery plays a huge role in the evolution of journals, as you see, especially with the two world wars, where lots of research came out of those conflicts, and that science began to get communicated much more rapidly. Although there was internal peer review in the first journals by their editors, the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society is the first journal documented as having a peer review process as we have come to know it. Publishers of journals in science, engineering, technology, mathematics, and medicine, affectionately referred to as STM or STEM, are familiar with the acronym IMRAD, which describes how a journal article should be structured. IMRAD equals Introduction, Methods, or Methodology, Results, and Discussion, and began to be adopted in the mid-19th century and by the late 1880s. Many STM/STEM journals had adopted the practice, but had not yet achieved industry standard status. Johns Hopkins University started its publishing program with medical books, primarily by renowned physicians practicing at their medical career. Northwestern University began publishing legal books in journals in 1893 and in 1957, and created a separate university publishing company. The IPA was founded in Paris in 1896 as an organization of publishing associations from around the world, devoted to the adoption of copyright laws and in support of copyright treaties and global copyright protection. With the emergence of IPA, we have the first of only a handful of organizations dedicated to the principles and practices of publishing. There were a number of university presses started immediately before and after World War I, no doubt to help with the communications of scientific, technical, and medical advances that normally accompany wars. Trinity College Press, established in 1991, was the predecessor to Duke University Press, officially founded in 1926. But the Johns Hopkins University Press, published in the late 19th century, is the oldest continuously publishing press in the United States. So you see a lot of different things happening really around the idea of community. Journals were and still are the place where communities are built and communities interact and networks are established, networks of researchers, 1937, the American Association for University Presses was established. Um, you see post-World War II, we talked about that, the growth in scientific journals explodes because of medical discoveries and how to treat wounds and how to do different things related to global conflicts. 1946, the first digital computer, and also the first professional membership society in 1957, the Council of Scientific Editors, which really came about as a way to establish standards around communicating scientific research and discovery. Trailing back to the previous slide, the Council of Biology Editors, now the Council of Science Editors, was created by an initiative of the National Science Foundation and the American Institute of Biological Sciences. At the same time, Dr. Eugene Garfield founded ISI, the Institute for Scientific Information, with a National Science Foundation grant focusing on the development and applications of citation indexing, with its most famous outcome, the journal impact factor. And he started this in his garage, the birthplace of many great businesses. And the impact factor, while imperfect, is still with us today. And it's really showing the incidence over time of a paper's the number of time that a paper's cited, divided by the number of papers that were published over that time. So if it's 3.1, that means it's cited 3 times for every batch of journal papers that gets published in that time frame. And it's withstood the test of time, and people still focus on it, and it's important to libraries and to researchers, also international researchers, because they're looking for publications with prestige to publish their journal articles in, and an impact factor. The journal with the number 1 impact factor is usually where people start when they're beginning their publishing careers, to try to find that. So you see a couple of things here. You see ISI starting, which is now a Thomson company. It's owned by Thomson Reuters. And then in 1961, the publication of the first abstracts journal, Chemical Abstracts, which is a massive organization in Columbus, Ohio, with over 1,200 employees that are abstracting the chemical literature. It's housed very close to Ohio State University, and it's abstracting all of the journal publishing in chemistry, which is very important to as you can imagine, to drug companies and information providers and people that are studying chemistry. And that's, at this point, close to a $400 million concern. You also see the beginnings of Medline, initiated by the National Library of Medicine. And in 1969, the birth of the Internet by Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn. And all of these things coming together really were of major importance to journal publishing, especially where it is today. You can track back to these breakthroughs. And in 1970, the American Chemical Society, who owns Chemical Abstracts, they had their first really electronic journal. And that's all was made possible by the things that are really happening here. It was nearly a century after IMRAD started being used in journal publishing that it was adopted as an official standard, another example of how slowly developments moved prior to the late 20th century. The 1970s was the decade of innovation, computing and printing technologies having the greatest impact on journal publishing. It was also the time for the first attempt at standardization in the area of computerized composition and typesetting, with Goldfarb applying the first document type definition, or DTD. The American Chemical Society's development of the online full-text database of its journal articles was the forerunner to chemistry journals online. And we talked a little bit about that. That was the first, in 1978, the first online full-text database in the sciences. I'm going to give another plug for Barbara here. She worked at the American Chemical Society when they launched those online journals. She was part of that team, and that just also makes her this wonderful resource for you to take advantage of when you take her course. She also helped found the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and it was the second individual membership society to be formed for professionals in publishing and gave a home and voice to all involved in scholarly communications, from author through reader, with an emphasis on librarians, publishers, subscription agents, and vendors. The Association of American Publishers and the Scholarly Publishing Division funded the development of SGML, the Standard Generalized Markup Language, by Aspen Systems Group. In the 3 decades since desktop computing came into existence, the world of publishing was transformed from an invisible conduit between author and reader to a very visible player in the scholarly communication process. Domain names were initially just a few: .gov, .edu, .org, and .com. Now the domains number in the hundreds. The LaserJet was the first desktop laser printer, which along with desktop computers brought about the short and painful era of desktop publishing. Here you have the beginnings of what was to become electronic journals publishing. And in 1985, Silver Platter unveiled a prototype of database aggregations and with its first partner. So it was the first real aggregation, which is a compilation of content from publishers within a database. Project Muse is an aggregation of about 200 publishers with book and journal content. Partners in the first aggregation were PsycInfo from the American Psychological Association and Sociological Abstracts. Psychology began as PsycNet newsletter in April of 1985 and was renamed in 1988. It was supported by the APA. Also, you begin to see AOL emerges here, and that was a really major breakthrough at the time, and it seems sort of passé today to talk about AOL. But yeah, here are a couple more things that happened that sort of moved things along towards the electronic publication of journals. I think the main item of importance on this slide has to do with SGML. And SGML was the precursor to XML, and its adoption as a standard took place in just 6 years after it was developed. A mere 5 years after the term was coined, the Internet took on a life of its own and launched a whole new world of communications and commerce. Tim Berners-Lee at CERN Applied Physics Laboratory in Geneva caught the world by surprise with his invention of the World Wide Web, which rides atop the Internet infrastructure. Publishers of all kinds were blindsided as to how best to adapt procedures, policies, and practices to this new way of interfacing with authors, readers, and literally everyone in the world. And what I'll say is, I don't know that we were blindsided. I'd say that we were given this tremendous opportunity. I think I was involved in a lot of the early experiments with journals, and I have to say that it was incredibly invigorating to be part of something that had never been done before. Paul Ginsparg, in his desire to make the literature serving the high energy and astrophysics communities, created a preprint website that survives today at Cornell University after going through a number of incarnations, and it's the physics community where this research is communicated, and it is accessible. It's not published in journals, and it's without charge, so it's accessible without paying a fee. In 1994, Highwire Press launched, and they are what is called a platform vendor, and they have over 1,100 journals on their platform. And they'll do that for societies and publishers. And it's mostly scientific content. And their first journal was the Journal of Biological Chemistry, which is a gigantic publication and one of the biggest journals in scientific publishing. And it's published by the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology and the ASBMB. And this is really the one that put Highwire, this publication put Highwire on the map. You also see the birth of Netscape. That seems just like a long time ago. Amazon.com also was born then. And this is also the time that I got involved in journals publishing, really electronic journals publishing. I'd been working at journals at Springer starting in 1989, and really began to take part in the transition from print to web in 1994. So I was certainly tracking with what was going on with Highwire. Scholarly publishers undertook research projects like Tulip and Red Sage I also went to a couple of the Red Sage meetings at the University of California at San Francisco. And that was a group of publishers with Bell Labs getting together to, figure out how we were going to do this, how we were going to put journals online. It was PDF driven mostly, and a lot of good discussions between publishers. But in the end, with Red Sage, everyone just kind of went their own direction. And Tulip, I'm not sure what that stands for, but that was an Elsevier driven project, and Karen Hunter, who worked for Elsevier, really drove that. Was a research project to examine ways that journals could be put online and could be used within university settings, another groundbreaking project. And in 1995, JSTOR and Project Muse were started with Mellon money, funding from the Mellon Foundation, and JSTOR began with archival content, older journals that were published prior to 1995, and Project Muse focused on journals published after 1995. And today that has changed. JSTOR is now doing current content, and Project Muse is doing back content. So that's a factor of the ecosystem and the landscape. Both services have evolved with the times. And also 1996 was the beginnings of the development of XML. So you begin to see some pretty significant changes in the mid 90s as publishers began to put their journals online, and then even think about finding help partners to help them do that in Highwire and also in Project Muse. There are journals that need a home, especially in humanities and social sciences. That's how Project Muse came to be. Was that the librarian at Johns Hopkins University and the director of the press were trying to figure out how these small journals from small publishers were going to have a web presence, and they went out and got the money from Mellon and made that happen. In 1997, you have PubMed being established at NIH, the National Institutes for Health, and it was really a database of abstracts and citations, PubMed, and that freely accessible abstracts and citations. Today they link to the full text for articles that have been funded into the open. Also in 1998 you have XML 1.0 established. The ARL count of electronic journals is nearing 2,500, with 1,049 of those peer-reviewed. SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, was launched by ARL, and that was an initiative designed to really directly take on Elsevier as and the big publishers who were charging exorbitant amounts for journals. And SPARC was trying to create cost-effective alternatives to the journals from Elsevier and Springer and Wiley. Also, Google opened its first office in California, and the Open Archives were initiated. Biomed Central also becomes a repository for OA content. But really, SPARC you could think of as one of the real early attempts by libraries to kind of push the open access issue. And we'll talk a little more about open access in the next few slides. In 2000, we have Crossref being formed, and Crossref is really the first initiative where all the publishers have come together to work together so that end users can link across different platforms and find article content. It's really the first example of publishers playing nice, and it's what publishers had tried to do or started to try and do in the 1970s, and finally it came to fruition. And when you're in Crossref, you get a report every month of all of the how many times your links have been resolved and people have accessed the links. And these are reference links at the end of your articles, and you'll see something that says Crossref that's hyperlinked, and you click on it and you'll jump to that article regardless of what platform you're on. And Biomed Central starts article processing fees in 2002, and that's the model for open access, where it's an author pays model, and the articles are paid into the open. Also, the Budapest Open Access Initiative manifesto is written. There's really the first directory of open access journals, and open access has really come about now because as soon as content started going on the World Wide Web, people just immediately assumed that it was going to be free. The idea that information yearns to be free is a very key concept to open access, and in some ways it makes a lot of sense. You have universities funding research and then having to buy it back from the likes of Elsevier and Wiley and lots of other places, and it's it makes some degree of sense. Also, taxpayer funded research that goes into finding medical discoveries. Why shouldn't the public be able to access that content? And there are also very emotionally driven case studies where folks have been diagnosed with a certain disease and have had to pay $35 per article to get that information. And you can see where there's a lot of frustration when you're looking at journals that cost in the thousands of dollars and articles that are very expensive when all of this has been funded by grants and by taxpayers and other things. So it does make some sense. You can just kind of read these here on this slide, and one thing that I wanted to mention was the Public Library of Science, which was started by a number of biomedical researchers, including Harold Varmus, who was the head of the National Institute of Health, and they decided that all scholarly biomedical publishers should become open access publishers. And Public Library of Science, the PLOS Journal as it's called, has been somewhat successful in attracting papers, and it's on a pay-per-view or pay-to-publish model. You pay. At one point, the article fees were $1,500, and your article was accessible to everyone, and it's worked pretty well. And the one thing you want to know about open access publishing is, what is the business model? That's the real question. It's expensive to do this stuff. It's expensive to conduct peer review, and you want to make sure that the work that you're putting out there, that you're publishing, is quality. There's one thing on this slide, the 2008 Chicago Collaborative. That's a group of librarians and publishers who get together to talk about the issues, and it's medical publishers. So, other than that, you can. This slide is fairly straightforward. One interesting thing on this slide is in 2009, the International Standard Name Identifier was developed by NISO, which is the National Information Standards Organization, and NISO is very helpful at defining standards for things like usage statistics and all different other types of protocols that have to do with digital publishing. And this is good to be able to track contributors and to find use this identifier to really find different artists and scientists and writers. And so that's another thing is how do you, in the digital world, keep track of contributors and what they're doing. I see also something I was very heavily involved in, the University Press Content Consortia, UPCC, which is down to the right, and it's the last item mentioned. And we did at Project Muse bid to be the publisher to launch UPCC, and it's a good story. When I responded to the RFP, we just kind of came up with this name, the University Press Content Consortia, and we didn't think that it would resonate, and we just
put that together, and they really took it and really loved our proposal. And we were going up against JSTOR and Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press, and they selected Project Muse to lead this initiative, and it was really a great moment in my career for that to have happened. Also, with anything on these slides, if you just simply search this terminology, you're going to find much more information about it, if there's anything that interests you, than what I'm giving you right now. Um, so, just look some of these things up at your leisure. And this is a very robust history. And the reason I present it to you is that I've never seen one as exhaustive as this, and I think it's very useful. And now what you find are publishers really starting to think about the journal of the 21st century. How is it going to evolve? And there are a lot of experiments underway. One particular one is going on at Elsevier for the Journal of the Future. And we'll get to that in a moment. But really, scholarly communications are undergoing profound changes driven by technology and economic factors, while authors' core motivations to publish remain stable. And really, the tenure and promotion process is still driving um, authors in STM disciplines and authors in humanities and social sciences to publish. And there's more submissions, especially in the area of science, that are coming into editorial offices that have to be peer reviewed. Everything has to be peer reviewed. There's new ways to communicate through social media, how a field develops and how a field advances. I once heard a researcher recently say to me that she follows her field or tracks her field by Twitter and is able to access articles, and look at how the field is evolving just from her Twitter feed, which I found interesting. Um, so change is constant. That's something that I really loved about working with journals, is that you had to embrace change all the time, that they were organic and cyclical, and they weren't this just sort of linear process of putting a book together. There was always something interesting going on, and um, I really enjoyed being a part of that. But especially with social media and the way that content can be shared, there's a whole new movement around something called altmetrics and ways to track the resonance of content and the proliferation of content outside of the simple article downloads. So that's something that we're also looking at Project Muse, and you know that's what's exciting about it, really. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that are going on in this space. We now find ourselves living in a time where there are 2,000 journal publishers globally, and that's a very interesting statistic. Um, there's probably been a rise of journal publishers, especially open access journal publishers, that have come on the scene. And when you look at this, 657 of those produce 50%, or 11,555 of those journals. 477 publishers, and 2,300 of those journals are not for profit. And that's interesting, that there doesn't really seem, things continue to grow. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of the need to um, publish material. And it also tracks back to something we talked about in the first lecture, is that there was very much with this rapid communications idea, this correspondence idea of getting the word out about what was happening, of tracking a field, that there was always kind of a driver that this be done profitably, that it be done on kind of cheap paper, and communicated quickly, but and that a fee be charged for it that was a little bit higher than maybe what you would pay for a book, because this was kind of a way to track this ongoing conversation. The journal is sometimes referred to as the conversation as it continues, and the book is really the long argument, and the journal is the ongoing conversation. And here are some more stats. I'm not really, these are things that Barbara has included, and I'll just put in a little bit of a plug for Barbara Meyers Ford on this slide, in that she's very exhaustive and thorough. And it was Barbara who came to me when I first took over this course 3 years ago, and we had 11 modules dedicated to books and one dedicated to journals. And she said, um, you really need to change that because when you think about these students, where are they going to get jobs? And in effect, she's correct that there are many more journal publishing jobs available than there are book publishing jobs these days when you think about the contraction going on. And she's right. So I think she deserves a lot of credit, and I hope you'll take her course because she's a fine instructor. And now let's get back to the Journal of the Future. The authors are looked at as drivers of certification and reputation. There's still a lot of prestige around being published. They're not, the motivations are still there. Those really haven't changed. But they're coming to the table now with sort of different notions and preconceptions, and there's a lot of education going on around how to bring especially the young researchers into the fold and to show appreciation for their contributions and author loyalty campaigns and trying to or contributor loyalty campaigns. I think that's really the term we're talking about, contributors to journals, to keep them coming to your publication. And publishers are looking at more innovative business models, looking at the individual as the purchaser as well as institutions, because really and this will bleed over into libraries, what's been going on is that the high cost of journals has really hamstrung and paralyzed many libraries from being able to purchase anything else but scientific, technical, and medical content. Their budgets have just grown over the years exponentially, and there's no room for any other content for them to purchase it. So, and they can't get out of these deals because their faculty and their researchers have been using these resources, and they can't just up and cancel them. But they've got a lot of their budgets tied up there, and they're not very happy about that. And they need to figure out how to reinvent themselves within libraries, the folks working in libraries, to meet the needs of the user. That's kind of the age that we're really entering into, is the age of the end user, and thinking about how is this content going to be used differently in the future? Who are the readers of the future? How are researchers going to collate and aggregate data and text and images and all of these other things? This slide is pretty obvious. Sure, there's still print journals, you have e-readers, you can access this content on the web, there are tablets, and there are mobile applications. And really, it's sites are being created now, content-driven sites with something called responsive design, which means that the templates will adapt to the device, and that you don't have to go out there and try to create something for the iPad that can't be used on the Samsung smartphone or the Droid. And responsive design kind of takes care of all of that. But really, this is fairly obvious, and there isn't anything groundbreaking here ultimately. And a lot of publishers will spend lots of money so that they can have their content or site optimized mobily, in the mobile setting, and that's great. But really, for humanities and social sciences, the business that I'm in, I don't know that these are not scientists or medical professionals on the go needing the most up to the minute research. So when we're talking to different vendors about it, it's not really a huge priority for us, but other publications find it useful. And my sense is really that it's the boards and it's the publishing boards that really want to show their friends that their articles can be accessed on a mobile device. But I wouldn't put a lot of resources around trying to really do this. I still think that predominantly at this stage of the game, folks are continuing to print out the PDF, and PDF still dominates, or is least 50% of the article downloads that go on in journal publishing. So for all of the things we're trying to do differently and dynamically, you still have a community that's slow to change and that's very steeped in that print artifact and what someone once called the pages of the novel on television, a PDF document.
And here are some of the things that are being talked about for the Journal of the Future: audio, geolocation, HTML5 widgets, page flips, scroll zones, slideshows, video, zoomable images, email, hotspots and pop-ups, hyperlinks, 360-degree images, selectable text, carousels, web views, and that's to the alt metrics to be able to see, what is actually happening at the article level to these, to this research. Where is it going? Where is it being shared? Um, and I think it's great. I think that anything that we can do to enrich and enhance the content beyond just the simple PDF is a great thing. And um, we're going to begin. We'll be seeing more and more of this stuff happening, and it's just going to, it's going to, take on a life of its own. It's going to matter really what the end users think and what the users, are doing with the content. So that's in a lot of ways this is an attempt to engage the user and to make this this my journal experience really robust. And we've been talking about it for the last several decades, so it would be great if we can actually make it happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And now we arrive at Elsevier's article of the future, and their primary goal is to address the loss of content that occurs when information-rich, multidimensional, digital scientific data are compressed onto the two-dimensional journal page, be it in print or digital form. So those things we'd listed on the other slide, those are some of the things that are going to be explored by Elsevier. And I actually left a link at the bottom of this slide for you to check out the article of the future and some of the things that they are doing. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes, where this goes. And that whole idea to embrace, experimentation and to be open to the possibility is at play here again. And we're at the second point in, the second major point in the evolution, that more and more things are going to be done to link and engage users to supplemental forms of content around article content. I think data is going to play a role here, and you've got to give Elsevier some measure of credit. They do make a lot of money, billions of dollars, and that's on one side, but they do take a lot of that money and invest in the future of scientific publishing, and that's kind of what you're seeing here, is just lots of money being poured into experimentation to try and create what the model is going to be for the future. And here are some things also that are listed: discipline-specific tools available from within the article. And mainly we're looking at scientific, technical, and medical content. There's a genome viewer, a molecule viewer, and we had those things at the American Chemical Society. We had ways within articles to manipulate the molecules. So some of this is not altogether new, but I think links to dataset repositories is something that, and to be able to link out to the repositories, not only the ones that are housed within Elsevier, but to all, would be great. Google Maps, that could be a very interesting thing for collaboration and for being, having users communicate around articles. This 3D imaging viewer, that sounds interesting. So looking at all of these things and kind of seeing what sticks and what users respond to, I think is a smart way to go, and it's exciting. And once again, UC Elsevier taking a leadership role. They were there um, when in the 1960s for the mass commercialization of journals, and now they're back again, continuing to innovate and to be dynamic and to kind of lead the way. So they are a very interesting company, and I'd encourage you to explore some of the things that they're doing. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention and hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll be in touch. And feel free to contact Barbara Meyers Ford. She would love to hear from you. She's very interested in students, and if she can help in any way, she would like to. So give her a shout if you have some time or if you have any questions, and she'll be happy to respond. And again, once again, thank you for your attention.